The gymnasium at Millbrook. High still smelled the same after 15 years. Floor wax, old wood, and the faint sweetness of crepe paper streamers that someone had hung with more enthusiasm than skill. Ryan Cooper stood near the refreshment table holding a plastic cup of lemonade he had no intention of drinking, watching his former classmates cluster into the same friend groups they had belonged to back in 2010, as though high school had never really ended, only paused for 15 years while everyone pretended to grow up elsewhere. He hadn't wanted to come. His sister Megan had practically dragged him to the reunion, insisting that hiding in his architecture firm every weekend wasn't healthy, that he needed to reconnect with people, that life didn't end just because his engagement had. Ryan had broken things off with his fiancée 8 months earlier, not because he stopped caring about her, but because he had realized somewhere along the way that the space in his heart-shaped like devotion had already been carved out years ago by someone else entirely, and no amount of trying could make it fit another person properly. He hadn't told anyone that. He barely admitted it to himself. He was 33 years old, still lean from years of cycling to clear his head, dark hair now touched with the first strands of gray at his temples, and he carried himself with the quiet reserve of a man who had learned to keep his disappointments private. He was scanning the crowd, mostly out of habit, not expecting to find anything when he saw her. Emma Whitfield stood near the gymnasium entrance, her pale blonde hair falling in loose waves against a lavender-wrapped dress, looking almost exactly as she had the last time he'd seen her, except for something new in her posture, a kind of careful, guarded strength that hadn't been there before. Beside her, holding tightly to her hand, was a little girl maybe 6 years old, wearing a cream-colored cardigan, her wide eyes taking in the decorated gymnasium with open wonder. Ryan's chest tightened instinctively. He hadn't seen Emma since graduation. They had dated for 2 years in high school, the kind of young love that felt enormous and permanent at the time, until college had pulled them to opposite coasts, him to an architecture program in Boston, her to a nursing program in California. And the distance had done what distance always does to love that isn't quite ready to fight for itself. They had drifted not through any dramatic betrayal, but through the slow erosion of two people too young and too afraid to ask the other to wait. He watched her scan the room, saw the moment her eyes landed on him, and felt something shift in the air between them even from 30 feet away. She smiled, small and uncertain, and began walking toward him, her daughter trailing beside her. "Ryan Cooper," she said when she reached him, her voice carrying the same warmth he remembered, though now edged with something more weathered. "I wasn't sure you'd be here. Megan made me come," he admitted, managing a smile. "I could say the same to you." Emma laughed softly, glancing down at the little girl beside her. "This is Lily, my daughter." Ryan crouched slightly, offering the girl a gentle smile. "Hi, Lily, I'm Ryan." Lily studied him with the unfiltered directness only children possess, tilting her head as though trying to solve a puzzle. Then, without warning, she pointed directly at him and looked up at her mother. "Mommy," she said, her small voice cutting through the gymnasium noise with startling clarity. "Is that the boy in the pictures? The one you said was your first love?" The words landed like a physical blow. Ryan felt his breath catch, and beside him, Emma's face flushed crimson, her composure cracking for just a moment before she gathered it back. "Lily," Emma said gently, though her voice trembled. "That's not exactly—" "You said his name was Ryan," Lily continued, oblivious to the storm she had just unleashed, "and that he had a nice smile. Just like in the picture in your box." Ryan didn't know what to say. He looked at Emma, who was staring at her, daughter with a mixture of embarrassment and something achingly vulnerable, and he realized, with a slow and devastating certainty, that Emma had kept something of him all these years, a photograph, a memory, a box tucked away somewhere that held a version of a life she hadn't chosen but perhaps had never fully let go of either. "She has a habit of saying whatever's in her head," Emma finally managed, laughing weakly, though her eyes were suspiciously bright. "I'm sorry, Ryan." "Don't be," he said softly. "I kept a picture too, if it helps." Emma looked up at him sharply, surprised, and for a moment neither of them said anything, the noise of the reunion fading into background, static as 15 years of unspoken history hung suspended between them. Later that evening, after Lily had fallen asleep on a stack of folding chairs pushed together near the gym wall, exhausted from cake and excitement. Ryan and Emma found themselves sitting on the school's back steps, away from the music and chatter, beneath a sky just beginning to darken into deep blue. Her father, Emma said quietly, before Ryan could ask the question sitting heavily in his throat. His name was Marcus. He was a firefighter in Sacramento. We met during nursing school. And he was, she paused, swallowing hard. He was the kind of man who ran toward danger without thinking twice about himself. That's exactly what happened 18 months ago. A structure fire. He went back in for a family trapped on the second floor. He got them out. He didn't get himself out. Ryan felt the weight of her grief settle over him like a heavy fog. Emma, I'm so sorry. Lily was 4 when it happened, Emma continued, her voice steady despite the emotion beneath it. She barely remembers him now, which breaks my heart more than anything else. I've spent the last year and a half trying to hold together some semblance of normal for her, working double shifts at the hospital, moving back near my parents in Portland for help with childcare. I haven't had room to think about myself, let alone the past. And yet you kept a picture of me, Ryan said gently, not accusingly, simply stating the quiet truth that had been hovering since Lily's innocent confession. Emma's eyes glistened. I never fully let go of the version of my life where I stayed with you, Ryan. Not because Marcus wasn't everything. I could have wanted he was a wonderful husband, a wonderful father, but because sometimes late at night, when Lily's asleep and the house is too quiet, I wonder about the road not taken. I think that's normal, isn't it? To wonder about the ghosts of choices you didn't make. Ryan reached over, hesitantly at first, and took her hand. I broke off an engagement 8 months ago, he confessed. Her name was Claire. She was kind and beautiful and did nothing wrong, but I couldn't marry her, while some part of me was still comparing every quiet Sunday morning to memories of you making pancakes in your parents' kitchen when we were 17. I didn't understand it until I ended things. I think I've been comparing everyone to a ghost too. They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of mutual confession settling comfortably, rather than awkwardly between them. Two people who had spent 15 years building separate lives only to discover that some threads never truly snap. They simply stretch, waiting patiently to be picked back up. I'm not the same person you knew at 18, Emma finally said. I have a daughter who needs stability more than anything else. I can't just fall into something because a reunion stirred up old feelings. I know, Ryan said. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking if I could take you both to breakfast tomorrow. No pressure, no expectations. Just breakfast. Emma smiled. The first truly unguarded smile he'd seen from her all night. Lily loves pancakes. Then it's settled, Ryan said. Pancakes it is. That breakfast became a Tuesday dinner, which became weekend visits to the Portland Japanese garden, which became Ryan carefully, patiently building a friendship with Lily that never once tried to replace the father she barely remembered, but instead created something new alongside that memory. He learned to braid hair, badly at first, then competently, after Lily insisted he practice on a doll, until he got good enough for real hair. He learned her favorite bedtime stories, her fear of thunderstorms, her fierce, unwavering love for her mother that manifested in fierce hugs and protective questions whenever Ryan came around, questions delivered with the same disarming directness that had started this entire journey. Are you going to make my mommy sad like the other guy did? Lily asked him bluntly one afternoon, months into their growing relationship, while they built a blanket fort in Emma's living room. Ryan paused, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. There was another guy? He didn't like that I asked too many questions, Lily said matter-of-factly, arranging a pillow with great concentration. Mommy cried after he left. Ryan felt something protective and fierce ignite in his chest. I like your questions, Lily. I think they're the most important part of you. And I would never want to make your mom cry. I promise. Lily studied him for a long moment, the same assessing look she'd given him at the reunion, before nodding decisively. Okay, I believe you. It took nearly a year of careful, deliberate rebuilding before Ryan finally worked up the courage to tell Emma he loved her, standing in her kitchen on a rainy October evening, while Lily slept upstairs, the smell of dinner still lingering in the air between them. I've loved you since I was 17 years old, he said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. I loved you when we were young enough to think love was simple. I loved you through every year I spent pretending I'd moved on. And I love you now, watching you rebuild a life for your daughter, with more strength than I've ever seen in anyone. I'm not asking you to replace anything you had with Marcus. I'm asking if there's room for me to build something new, alongside the love you'll always carry for him. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. The kind of smile that carries both grief and hope simultaneously. The particular alchemy of a heart that has learned loss doesn't have to mean the end of love, only its evolution into something more complicated and more resilient. There's room, she whispered. There's always been room. I think some part of me was saving it, even when I didn't understand why. They married the following autumn in a small ceremony at the same Japanese garden where their rebuilding had quietly begun, surrounded by maple trees blazing red and gold. Lily, now 7, served as flower girl, taking her responsibilities with characteristic seriousness, scattering rose petals down the aisle with the focused determination of a child who understood, in her own way, that something important was happening. During the reception, Ryan knelt down to Lily's level, straightening the small flower crown that had begun to slip from her curls. "Does this mean you're my dad now?" Lily asked, the question landing with unexpected weight in the golden autumn air. Ryan felt his throat tighten. "I'll never try to replace your dad, Lily. Marcus will always be your father, and he was a hero. But if it's all right with you, I'd be honored to be your stepdad, to be someone else who loves you, for as long as you'll have me." Lily considered this with her usual gravity before throwing her small arms around his neck. "Okay, I think that's a good plan." Over Ryan's shoulder, Emma watched the exchange with tears streaming freely down her face, no longer trying to hide them, understanding perhaps for the first time in 18 months that grief and joy could occupy the same heart without canceling each other out, that healing didn't mean forgetting, and second chances didn't require erasing what came before them. Years later, when people asked Emma how she and Ryan had found their way back to each other after 15 years apart, she would smile and say simply, "My daughter recognized him before I let myself admit that I had too." And Ryan, watching his family, his wife, his stepdaughter, and eventually the son they welcomed together 2 years later, would think back to that gymnasium, to a small girl's unfiltered question that had cracked open a door he hadn't realized was still unlocked, and understand that sometimes the most profound love stories don't begin with grand gestures, but with a child's honest observation, spoken plainly into a room full of people who had forgotten how to be honest themselves.